Are you curious about bodies, pleasure, and possibilities? And what about curious about what others are up to on the planet when it comes to pleasure, sex, and play? Have you considered what pleasure can do for your life, your body, and your bank account? Do you know something magical, delightful, and out of this world orgasmic is not only possible for you, but totally available to you? If you're ready to be the magical, sexual, sexy beast you know you can be, and you just need the tools to get there, you're in the right place. Now, here's the host of The Pleasure Zone, sensual movement artist, relationship and sex alchemist, Milica Jelenic.
Welcome, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight, we're going to be discussing creating space for pleasure. What does that mean? I know that a lot of people will say, I don't have time for that. And so to me, space means both creating the physical space in your home or environment, and also the time space as well, space in your mind as well. So we will be diving into all of that. For those of you who have never listened to The Pleasure Zone, where have you been? What have you been doing? I've been going for like over 9 years at this awesome show, almost 10. So if you have never listened, please listen to this one, stay tuned, and then go back. Check out all of the different podcasts I have available on all the different podcast platforms. Watch all the different TV episodes I've got available on the video platforms, because you know what? There is just so much available, and it's so fun for me to talk about all things pleasure and different ways of looking at pleasure. And I always find it really fun meeting new people for the very first time, and they ask, so what do you do for like a living? And I sometimes, depending on who it is, I'll start with, I'm a holistic health practitioner, and I work with people, mainly working with them, bringing them out of trauma and into pleasure. And then people's eyes kind of peek up. Sometimes they turn right off. Sometimes people get so scared to talk about pleasure because they don't actually have space in their mind or in their heart or in their life for pleasure. It's actually scary. So if you're living in your body is experiencing a lot of stress or trauma, there isn't a lot of space for pleasure, or you might think there isn't a lot of space for pleasure. Lately, I've had this like crazy obsession with watching the guy on YouTube called the Midwest Cleaner. And he is amazing. He cleans boarding houses. And I also watch another cleaner on YouTube. Her name is Katerina, and she also cleans really big messes. And I look at these spaces that people are in, and their homes are just covered in trash and things that they've over collected, and there's no organization happening, and it's just like chaotic. My desk can be chaotic, and then there comes a point where I have to take care of that. So I do get that there can be some chaos in our lives, and then there's a point where you need to create space for things to move through, and you need to create space for pleasure, because when you are surrounded by chaos, there tends to be very little pleasure. Even the people who live in it who are like, no, I'm fine with it, there's something in them that actually they're not fine with it. For sure, when they finally do get a space that's cleared out and they can do other things and they can create, there's usually a lot more joy in their lives, and then their bodies heal as well. So I think for me, I think there's been a lot of things that are just kind of surrounding me lately that are in my periphery that have brought the idea of talking about creating a space for pleasure to the forefront in order to talk about it, because I think a lot of times we just brush it aside. Maybe we'll make space to eat, and even at that, sometimes we're making just so much space to eat that we're not preparing meals that are healthy. We don't have the time, we don't have the space, we don't have the bandwidth or the space, even in our minds or in our lives, in our busy lives, to look after ourselves. And looking after yourself, one of the key things to me to looking after yourself is to find things that bring you pleasure. So looking at, for example, my chaotic desk doesn't bring me pleasure. What will bring me pleasure is tomorrow morning when I wake up early and I take care of a bunch of this stuff. Mostly because it's sitting here for tax purposes, waiting to get organized, as I was organizing my dad's taxes prior. So that doesn't give me pleasure, but what does give me pleasure is getting it out of the way. And some things that we do can be taxing, and some things that we do can be invigorating and bring us more energy, right? So the things that are pleasurable tend to bring us more energy. So sometimes we've got to get the taxing things out of the way, or hire other people who really are great at that to get the taxing things out of the way, and then get into the things that are pleasurable. I was watching today, I also randomly love watching things all about anthropology. I love Time Team, even though I think they're just bringing new Time Teams back. So if you're not familiar with the show Time Team, it's a British show, and they do archaeological digs. And I always find that I learn something from watching Time Team and other archaeological shows. And the coolest thing that I learned from those is how far back humans have gone, and not just like time-wise how far we've gone, but how far we've gone throughout the ages, having things that bring us pleasure, whether it's art or music, or like there's evidence of things that are like 60,000 years old. There are, it's amazing what early human, modern human, I don't really know the terminology offhand. When I just like to watch this stuff, I don't study anthropology. I did 1 year in university, but it was an early morning class and I never made it. And I'm much better at learning when I listen rather than when I read. So that was a big fail, that class. But I love watching shows where they're unearthing things. And it's kind of like the same with people doing big hoarding cleans. They're unearthing things. It's always like revealing something new, something lost, something hidden. And I find that we have those aspects of ourselves too. And that's what I love doing in my work too, is helping people find, it's like an archaeological dig, finding those things in those parts of themselves that are lost and hidden, whether it's things that bring you pleasure or things, even you might have had like old family recipes that you love the food, but you thought, oh, I can't eat that anymore for whatever reason. And then unearthing those things that are treasures for you and finding ways to incorporate them back into your life. That is fun. So when I do work with people, I work with them on their health as well as so physically, I work on their bodies through movement. I also work on their bodies through energy, something called radionics. And also hands-on healing energy work. And I also do sex and intimacy coaching, which is so much fun. So I work with individuals and I work with couples. And one of the things that I find is that most people do not have a space that they designate for pleasure. So I happen to be extremely lucky. I'd say privileged in a way. Absolutely, I'm privileged. I have a roof over my head and food on my plate. That counts as privilege. So in my space, the land that I live on, we have a cabin that is both where I work out of when I have clients come privately, but also it has several bedrooms, and it is absolutely a pleasure den. So it is really fun to have a space set aside for pleasure, so that you're not in the same bedroom where maybe you haven't put away the laundry yet, or you might have other things going on. The bedroom is, oftentimes it's really great for sleeping, but if you want to have fun, playful sex that doesn't just land you falling asleep right after, and that's great sex too, the sex that happens right before bed or the sex that happens right in the morning, but it's really fun to have a designated space that you can go to and have that set aside. It's probably why so many hotels have people, want to, book by the hour. You have places like Hedonism where people go specifically for pleasure. There was a show on Netflix a little while ago, and I think it was called Sexify My Space, something like that. It was a designer who would go into homes and create sexy spaces for couples. So there's a lot of more trend towards people designating space for pleasure, which is great. And in this case, we'll be talking about pleasure in more of a broader sense rather than that it has to be like your fun, sexy den, uh, which go for it. Have one of those too. Have your fun, sexy den. I want to talk about the history of pleasure because there came a time in our I don't know if we could call it evolution as I, start to understand more or what's being revealed through archaeology, and it changes all the time. As historically, we've been beings who develop things to create pleasure. So one of the evidences we have of that, and I'm just going to make sure I know the date on this. So one of our very first evidences of pleasure comes from about 60,000 years ago. And the 60,000-year-old flute, it was a Neanderthal flute, and it was discovered in a place called Divya Babet, near Cerkno. That sounds really very much like it's probably, I don't know where these places are located, but it sounds very Slavic. Anyway, so the flute that's 60,000 years old is one of those indicators that human beings have sought out something other than something just for survival for over 60,000 years, developed whatever we were called then, Neanderthals. So we went from being survivalists, we went from being, we are here to hunt and gather, to going, wait a second, there's more to this existence. Let's make a flute. And so the evidence of the flute was made out of, I believe, bird's bone. So it very much bears likeness to modern day wind instruments. So pretty fascinating. If you want more information on the history of flutes, I actually know somebody who is like a full-on flute expert. I don't know what the name of that is. He has been on the show. His name is David Lazatsky. He's been on the show and he is a PhD. He has a PhD in flutes and knows all the history of it. This just happens to be a fun little side note that we actually sought pleasure, which is fascinating because you think, I don't know about you, but when I think of Neanderthal, I don't think of somebody who's sitting around thinking, let's make some music. Though probably, banging something against a rock was probably more likely the first kind of rhythmical sounds that probably came, or sound through mouth, sort of, that probably also would have created music, but they know and they can date. I mean, they can't date whether music was made because it wasn't recorded, right? And they can't date whether a rock was hit to make music, but they can definitely date that the flute was created and probably used to make sounds because of the way that it was shaped. So I think that's fascinating that we chose to do that. And there probably would have been at the time, whether people were living in, tents or stone huts or caves, because human, throughout history, we've always sought shelter to make sure that we survive. So there was definitely shelters of some kind. These were probably played somewhere in a setting, maybe solo even, but they were definitely played for enjoyment. They could have even been played maybe in conjunction with like other animals that made noises, trying to mimic them, trying to use it for hunting as well, possibly. However, there's likely a huge component of it that was just sheerly for pleasure. And there's other evidence too that you can look that humans were looking for, Neanderthal was looking for pleasure in things that they carved and painted. So like cave paintings from 40,000 years ago. And the fact that the way that they painted them, and the paint is still there, that the way that they painted them into the rocks and into the formation of the rocks, the way that if you actually lit a fire in those caves, the images have like a movement about them. That is really cool too. So you know that we were always looking for something entertaining and pleasurable. And whether we had designated spaces for that, we don't really know or have evidence of that till about several thousand years BC. So, 5 or so thousand years ago, there's more evidence of things like that there had been gardens and outdoor setting, writings about these things too, that there had been pleasure gardens and places that were designated just for pleasure. So those come into play. And we're going to talk more about those because they're a little bit closer to what we in modern day would have as a pleasure space. Although if you think about some of our pleasure spaces, the man cave, with a big TV on the wall is not that different than 40,000 years ago, paintings on the wall that kind of danced in the firelight with movement. And that would have been just about as entertaining for them as, watching the football game is for, Joe Spratt on a Sunday afternoon. So I think it's really cool that we've sought this and we've moved ourselves out of just survival, and that we've moved out of survival and into seeking ways to have fun and pleasure. And that to me says a lot about what we can do even in our own lives. We can move out of survival and we can move into pleasure, although that transformation happened over tens of thousands of years historically. We can do it in our own lifetime to move out of some of these survival instincts, fight or flight, freeze, all of these things that put us into survival mode, and move into pleasure. And it's such a gift for your body for healing. So if you look at what you have around your home right now, so if you're watching on video, you might notice that in my space, I have some paintings in the background. Sometimes they change up, sometimes I take them down. It's all just for, added pleasure. What do you have in your home right now when you look around that adds a little pleasure for you? And if you honestly can look around and find nothing, now's a great time to add something that brings you pleasure. If you are stressed and you are having if your home is a hoarder's home and you just have too much stuff and you can't manage it, maybe now's a good time to ask for help so that you can add pleasure. We're going to head to our first commercial break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back to talk more about creating pleasure spaces when we return.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email becomeahost@inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Just before the last break, we were talking a little bit about evidence of the evolution of pleasure and how once we kind of, as what we now are as human beings, once we moved out of survival mode, just, hunter-gatherer mode, we started to be able to get into more pleasure. And also moving out of certain things, like moving out of hunter-gatherer mode and into being able to have settlements where there was farming, like that was a huge impact too, so that you weren't always having to go seek your food, you would have some food there. Also freed up a little bit of time to create other things and to look at other, it kind of evolved the lives, the daily lives of the people. So now you have time for things like music or paintings or, gardening that is for your food. But also as time goes on, and we're looking at some of the first evidence in Rome at around 1500 BC, there is, and they probably go back before this, but there are there's documentation around gardens in Rome at around 1500 BC that were really all about entertainment spaces with music and dancing and all kinds of fun. And there were a lot, historically, like a lot of Roman emperors that were, and just Roman nobility, and surrounding areas, nobility that just loved to have things like orgies, and they had, spaces dedicated to that. There is a really great book called The Curious History of Sex, and the stories that are in there are fantastic. So if you would like more history of, the raunchy and the fun, Curious History of Sex is a great one to have a listen to learn more about that. And there's also some other ones out there like Kinky History, and there's really great books that you can get more info on that. So tonight we are talking about pleasure spaces. And for those of you who were listening to the last segment, and I had mentioned that, we can get ourselves out of survival mode and into pleasure. And we know that because we can see how we have done that throughout history. People have been able to get themselves out of survival and into pleasure. And if you're right now kind of in survival mode and you don't know what steps to take, you have no idea how to even start to create even the space in your mind for pleasure, just connect with me. You can go over to my website at milicajelenic.com. That's MILICAJELENIC.com. And at the very top, there's a book now link. You can book 15 minutes for free with me, and we can have a chat. If you'd like more time, you can book more time, but more time you do have to pay for it. So if you are like really stressed and going, I have no idea even where to start with pleasure. I don't know if I've ever had it in my life. I don't even know what you're talking about when you say, look around your house and see what brings you pleasure. If there is literally nothing in your home that's bringing you pleasure, not even like the clothing you're wearing or anything, it's time for an overhaul. It's time to start, and it doesn't mean to do it all at once. You start with generally one simple thing. So in it for everybody, it'll be different. So where would you like to create space, pleasure? Sometimes it's just clearing off the dining room table so that you can sit down and eat a meal at the dining room table. It could be, cleaning out your bathtub so you can sit in your bathtub and soak. And if all of that's really daunting, there are people who can help you with that too. It's just that you need to be willing to ask for the help in order to get yourself back on track. So we can talk about it. You can connect with people if you need the assistance to get things moving and cleaned, and figure out what that first step is for you. Sometimes it's not in your home necessarily, but you need to create space in your mind and your head. And I have people who come to me to get on my massage table so that they can have body work done or energy work done. And it creates space in their being, in their body, and then they can go off and feel rejuvenated and have a different kind of perspective on life, and then be able to approach things differently and more effectively. So they're, love to connect with you on that too. If you are local, and even if you're not, if you feel like you just want to get on a plane or a train or a bus or drive, let me know. There is room for you. There is space. I have a pleasure space, and you're welcome to it. So when I was looking at some of the historical evidence of pleasure, I really didn't look at it from the perspective of when did people start having, sex dungeons. Sex dungeons have been around for quite a while too, by the way, although now we are far more consensual than we were prior, than like the in the last couple 300-400 years, where it was masochism for the sake of masochism and sadism for the sake of sadism, with not really consent. It was really just torture for the pleasure of it, and being tortured for the pleasure of it, that sort of thing. But nobody really had discussions like we talk now more about that in the kink arena, where it's really important to have consent and conversation and communication, safe words, all of those things. Those things were not really in play from any of the literature I've read. Those things were not really in play several hundred years ago, but they have evolved. So yay that they've evolved. There were definitely spaces, like I was mentioning earlier, that you can look historically. There's documentation of all kinds of Roman emperors having all kinds of massive orgies all over the place, mostly in their palaces. So there were rooms that were not necessarily dedicated to that, but when they were having parties, it would be like we'll just call it the party room. So those rooms would be converted into, like, you'd bring in the furniture, you'd bring in the food, you'd bring in everything that was that you were going to have like a hedonistic evening or weekend or week with, because some of those things lasted days and days and days. And there were spaces like that, and then there were private spaces off of those as well that were available. And when they go to look at some of these things from antiquity, and they look at some of the evidence of what was going on, they don't necessarily know that from looking at the rooms themselves, but there's often written documentation that they can do reference for, where there were things written about, say like Caligula, for example, who really loved his orgies, and he was insane. But in terms of pleasure spaces for your own self, some of the things that are important is, number one, get into the mindset of space in your mind for pleasure, because you could have all the space in your home that you want for pleasure. You could have, you could actually have a really tidy home, and you could have beautiful things set up in it, and beautiful colors and beautiful lighting and beautiful smells, but your mind could be so cluttered, because that does happen too, where sometimes there's, a really cleared out home, but internally it's a mess. So we've got to look at the internal as well as the environment, so that, those things they'll go harmoniously together. So clearing your mind, lots of people talk about meditation, lots of people talk about breath work and meditation. Actually, all of these things all go back to yogic practices, and are not given enough credit for that. But any practice that basically allows you to become self-aware and allows you to know what is stopping you from having clarity. So whether you're doing self-reflection by writing, or whether you're meditating quietly, or whether you're having like a guided meditation or breathwork meditation, or you're doing total silence, or you're doing, like, there's so many variations on meditation. Whatever gets your mind, body, spirit connection happening, that's what we want to do, right? So whether, if you're doing breathing and movement, fantastic. If you're doing somatic movement work, which is what I facilitate and teach and have been doing for 17 years, and I was a student before that, so I've been at it for 20 something years. I can't even remember. So we want to make sure that you are connected first, that you can have, and you're willing to receive pleasure in your body, number one. And how do you do that? So we're going to talk about some how do you do that when we come back from this commercial break. You're listening to the Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Interested in masturbating for money, copulating for consciousness, and pleasuring on purpose? 21 Days of Sexual Magicism with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic is an exploration of tools, processes, and actions that you can use to create more for your life, your body, your money inflows, and so much more. Graduated learning for all levels of interest. Learn at your own pace via video classes or join the yearly live class. Take a peek at www.milicajelenic.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is the Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight you're listening to this episode of The Pleasure Zone, and maybe many more. If you happen to love this episode and you're like, hey, while I'm at it, I'm going to go listen to a bunch more, which you can do on many different platforms, including the, if you haven't got it already, the Inspired Choices Network app. And if you have got it, fantastic. You can listen to a whole lot of episodes on there. You can also go back on any of your favorite platforms and listen to many of the other shows. So one of the questions that I have in the chat is, what's the motivating factor that would make pleasure a priority? Like, why do we care? Why does it matter? Why do we need it? Well, there are certain things in our bodies called hormones that will be activated when you have pleasure. So if you've ever heard of them, they're called the happy hormones, and they spell out the word dose, D-O-S-E. So we got dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And those hormones, when you are experiencing pleasure, those hormones kick in. They actually start to regulate your body and help your body to get calmer. They do get your body excited, but also simultaneously calm. You don't feel threatened. So it's more of an excitement rather than a threatened excitement of, I must respond, I might be dying. So your body will start to regulate itself a lot better. You'll be able to be calmer. You'll have also things like depression starts to get alleviated. And, even anxieties can become alleviated, which as a result, you can have better sleep. Your digestion improves. Your heart rate is, more regulated. Like, so many of the systems in your body can start to operate better when you are having these pleasure moments or space for pleasure in your life. And I think one of the things that we sometimes brush it aside because we get so busy and we're just in our daily routine of, I've got to do this, I have to do that, I have to meet these targets. And yeah, sometimes when you hit your targets, you will get a dose of one of the happy hormones, like an endorphin rush, and yeah, I made it, I did it. And you might keep striving because you need that dose of endorphins, but you also need the dopamine, the oxytocin, the serotonin. You need all of those to help have that more regulated. And it doesn't have to be like that pleasure space. It does help to have touch involved to get things like serotonin and oxytocin. But it's not that that's your only way to do that. Is through touch like sex, but you can do it even through just things like hugging and having a space that feels private or feels pleasurable for you. I shouldn't say private, because pleasure for everybody doesn't mean private. Pleasure for some people means that they want to be exhibitionists, and that's cool too, as long as everybody is consenting to it. So having that space of pleasure for you where you can receive, all the touch that you need, all of the affirmations that you need, all those love language things, gifts and all of that. So why is this important? Is because we need to have a place that we can count on, that when things feel like poop or we feel depressed, we know, what? I can just go out to my space. And that space is going to help me feel better. And yes, I do know that not everybody has like a home that has extra bedrooms, or there's like, not everybody has a cabin in their field. I get that. So it doesn't have to be big. Your space can also be transient. It can change all the time. It can also be somewhere that it's your space for a few hours. Like I was saying, cleaning the bathtub and then creating your bathroom as a space for pleasure for you. Say you happen to have kids and the kids are out for the night, or somebody's, babysitting the kids. Whether you're alone or you have a partner, you can do something in that space. You can create the bathroom then for a moment as a sacred love space. Whether you're putting oils in your water, some like essential oils, or lighting candles, or doing none of that and just turning off the lights and having a quiet time with music on, or maybe even none of that. Maybe you just want total silence, soaking in a bathtub, whatever pleasure is to you. So having that space, and even though the next day that bathtub might not be dedicated to you having your deep soak and your meditation time, it's that that you can create that. Why do you know that? Because you proved it to yourself once. If you did it once, you can do it again. So as long as you can do something once, the chances are you'll be able to repeat. So getting somebody to babysit so that you can have the space to do this and to do that. If you can prove it to yourself once, the chances are you're going to do it again and again and again. and or desire to, so you'll make the effort into it. But if you've never done it, it's getting into that first step of choosing pleasure for you and choosing to create a space of pleasure in your mind and in your home, no matter how big your home is. Even if you live in one bedroom and you share space with other people, in that one bedroom, you can create that space that is yours, that is absolutely just for you, just for pleasure. You know, could be paintings on the wall, could be the texture of the sheets that you have, whatever that happens to be. It's that you've done it for you. And starting with just one thing, if you've never done that before, if you've never had a space that was yours, that you got to create, that you got to put your own things in, to create your own space of pleasure. I think the very first time I had was, I remember being given the opportunity to create my own space when I was 6 years old. And we moved into a house and I had my own bedroom. And prior to that, I don't really remember what my bedrooms were like, but I remember this bedroom. Prior to that, we were kind of moving around and there was a lot of trauma. But this bedroom, I got to pick my wallpaper. And looking back, I picked some of the most hideous wallpaper that was probably available on the market. But man, did it make me happy. I had Mickey Mouse and Pluto, and there was like a Minnie Mouse, and there was all these Disney characters, and they were all in these buckets floating all over my wall. And I would stare at them at night. I just loved looking at my Mickey Mouse wallpaper. And I had so I had 3 walls like that in a tiny room. We're talking a room that was maybe 7 feet by 8 feet. It was tiny. My bed, I had a double bed and it just fit with one dresser, and I could barely open the dresser drawers. And my other wall was dark blue with like light blue flowers on it, and they looked absolutely terrible together. Man, that was my space. And in my space, I also had a 4-poster bed that my uncle had made by hand, cherry wood and double bed, and stunning bed, still have it to this day. And it was 4 posters, and it had a canopy. The canopy no longer operates on it because it cracked. But that was mine. That was my space, and that brought me pleasure. I could be in that room and I could feel safe. It was when other people came in my room without permission that made me mad, because that was my sacred space. So if you do, by the way, have kids and you have given them a space that's their own, please don't have other people sleep in their bed unless you've asked their permission for that. And if they say no, honor them. Just keeping it at that. So when you have your own space, it is sacred to you, and you need to honor that for you too. And you know, if you are inviting people into your sacred space, make sure that it feels safe when you do that. Like, you don't want to invite somebody in who's going to mock your bedroom or pick on you for whatever you've got going on. That's your sacred space. So whatever you want to do with that, I would, unless you get off on being mocked, then that's a whole other story for another day. Generally be kind to you. Whatever is kindness for you in that moment, do that for you. So I think one of the reasons why people need to get these spaces is so that they can rely on space in your mind, get those happy hormones going. And so you can get those happy hormones going, you know, all those meditation things we talked about, that's great. Sometimes getting your happy hormones going can be going out, and everybody's into pickleball these days. Maybe you want to go out and play pickleball. Maybe you want to go out and ride a horse or go for a walk, or, you know, go whatever you're doing, fishing, whatever people are doing these days. Get those happy hormones going so that you can be relaxed. When you bring that into your home, then that's going to also emanate throughout your space, however big your space is or however small your space is. When you bring your calmness and relaxation into it, it doesn't really matter if you've got some mess on your desk. If you're bringing your calm, your relaxation, and your pleasure into a space, all that stuff will get taken care of. because you're going to be in a different mindset. You're going to be in the mindset where you do care about that and you will take care of that. And also that your calm is actually more important to you. So whatever it is for you, you might want to go painting, or you might want to try out a new activity. And I think trying out new things is a great way to get your pleasure hormones going. But sometimes when you're really, really depressed, trying out new things that you aren't successful at can actually kind of take you down and make you feel worse about yourself. So, kind of feel that out. Like, do you feel like you might have some kind of inkling of success on something? Like, I wouldn't go carving statues of Michelangelo because I'm not at that level of carving. So, I might try something else. I have done stone carving though, and it is fun. But I'm just saying, you want to try and do something where that the chances are you're going to have some kind of success to get some happy hormones kicking in, and that way that will translate to more success for you. So we are going to take our next break. You're listening to the Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network. I'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Interested in masturbating for money, copulating for consciousness, and pleasuring on purpose? 21 Days of Sexual Magicism with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic is an exploration of tools, processes, and actions that you can use to create more for your life, your body, your money inflows, and so much more. Graduated learning for all levels of interest. Learn at your own pace via video classes or join the yearly live class. Take a peek at www.milicajelenic.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is the Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight we are talking all about creating pleasure spaces in our mind, our body, our being, and in our external environment. So pleasure, we know that when we are out of survival mode, when we are able to get into pleasure and bring in those happy hormones of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. So they spell dose when you think about them. And they are really great for getting your body back on track and getting your body to start to heal. And one of the reasons your body starts to heal is because your body gets calm. And then that polyvagal response is when you're in fight or flight or freeze mode. it starts to put your body into the calm mode where you can actually heal. So when you're in fight or flight, you don't heal. And when you're in freeze, you don't heal. And when you're going back and forth into fawn, and there's a whole bunch of other combinations, your body can't heal. It's on alert. So bringing the happy hormones in gets your body to come back down. Also, some of those happy hormones come in because you're connecting with people. And those connections are also important in getting your whole nervous system, your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system to be balanced. So it's super important to have in your space, in your home, space that brings you pleasure so that your environment is healing for you. It's also important that your mind is filled with ideas for pleasure. And if you really have none and you can't remember any time in your life where you've ever had any pleasure at all, now's a great time to actually start to explore new ideas. A lot of times what I will do with people is look at, like, what did you love when you were a kid? And I know what I loved when I was a kid is I loved watching Mr. Dress Up when I was really little. And I also loved watching Sesame Street. And it wasn't just because I liked learning from Sesame Street. I was fascinated by the puppets. How did they work? What was behind them? How could I make one? I wanted to know all that stuff. And Mr. Dress Up was a show in Canada with a guy who did crafts and read stories, and he dressed up. And there were puppets on his show too, Casey and Finnegan, and I loved them, and I wanted to be able to play with those puppets. So for me, I know when I want to go back into my happy hormone place, sometimes all I have to do is play like a kid, sometimes with puppets. And it's not always true for everybody, but those things are true for me. They also really tap into my inner child, which brings, attention to my inner child, which makes my inner child happy and calm. And so for you, there might be things like maybe you really love playing baseball as a kid. And so going out to play baseball, that'll bring you some joy. Maybe you like rollerblading or roller skating, go do that. Generally speaking, and if you can't do those things, sometimes, like if you're physically unable to go do them, maybe you've lost mobility or something, there'll probably be something that you can do that's similar, or watching that sometimes can help, or finding a whole new thing that you enjoy, or teaching people how to do that can help too. So lots of different ways that you can tap into your happy hormones and remember things that bring you joy, because it's so integral to our healing. I can't stress that enough. I think people just kind of take it for granted that it's not that it's not that important. It's only happiness, big deal. And it's actually quite important. It's really important for healing. So you can't actually, the only way you could overdose on pleasure is if you're doing it through stimulants and trying to get it through drugs and trying to get the next high. That's different. You're actually going to fry your system. But naturally creating that in your life through things like that bring you joy, like roller skating and baking and all these things that probably really help you feel fulfilled and joyful, and they're creative. And sometimes they're not creative. Sometimes it's just staring at birds, and that brings you joy. Do it. And the more you do these things, the more your body gets calm and heals. And it's so wild. And time and again, I've talked with people who they go from being like really depressed. They find something that sparks joy, which is a great term. It'll spark some joy in them. And that's like a Marie Kondo term. And their bodies will start to heal, like spontaneous healing. And their minds will start to find hope. And there's so much that's available when you have those things under your belt. When you've got joy and you got some hope under your belt, that's awesome. So I hope you guys come back for next week. Stay tuned in and turned on, of course, and when we have our next.
Thank you for listening to The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. The Pleasure Zone returns next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by choosing to be turned on and tuned in to your body.